Hi, True Avatars. Welcome to the 20th episode of your Queer Video Game Podcast. I am your host, Zoe Wild. I am a transgender and bisexual woman, and my pronouns are she, her. This week, I am joined by a really cool returning guest, Lloyd Lloydster. Lloyd is a trans man who streams a wide variety of games on Twitch. Lloyd's pronouns are he, him. Hi, Lloyd. How are you?
Hello, Zoe. I'm good. Happy to be here.
It's so good to have you back on the show. For any listeners who may have missed it, Lloyd first appeared in episode 18, so you should definitely go back and check out that episode. But today, Lloyd is joining me to cover the news since there's a lot this week. In the second half of the episode, it's just going to be me. I'll be discussing the games of Toronto-based queer developer Rocket Adrift. Rocket Adrift is known for making Raptor Boyfriend and the recently released Psychroma. All these games are as similar as they are different, and I've really wanted to talk about them for a while, and why these are queer games you absolutely must play. But before all that, Lloyd, what have you been playing recently?
What have I been playing? So I've been playing a lot of New World, and this weekend they had a Outpost Rush, a PvP game mode that has a lot of incentives to get folks to play it. So just getting bullied in PvP. Usually don't play PvP, but and more like that like feeds my soul in a wholesome way. I found Rapuka's Idle Island. It's this really adorable PC game. Technically, it sits on top of your screen, like as a layer on top of everything else you're doing, and it's just a cute little floating island. A little frog man runs around cutting grass, and you can unlock more cosmetics and things and upgrade his efficiency, and it's fed my soul quite a bit.
Ooh, what did you say? Can you repeat the title for me? I'm just gonna look this up.
Yeah, that's Rapuka's Idle. Let's see, Rapuka's Idle Island.
Idle Island.
And it is lovely because I think it's sort of packaged, or at least it was on the TikTok I saw that pushed me in that direction, as a productivity tool. And it surprisingly is. Like, you'd think it's a bit of a distraction because it's a game, on top of that sits on the, you see it, and you can navigate behind it, to work on something or to edit something or whatever you have to do, whatever you're doing. But I find it actually does help me stay more focused and not either scrolling social media or whatever other idle, not helpful things I usually tend to do.
Ooh, I'm actually having a hard time finding. How do you spell Rapuka?
Ropuka. Rapuka's Idle Island. And I got it on Steam.
Oh, okay, I did find it. Okay, I'm spelling everything incorrectly. I spelled Rapuka completely differently. I used the wrong version of idle. And then I doubled down and I was like, no, I definitely want to find, I chose the to put quotation marks around Rapuka the way I spelt it wrong, and it was Google's I have nothing on this. The word has never existed ever because I was spelling it wrong. No, this looks so cute. Oh my gosh. I think I might be distracted though.
I thought so too, and I went for it. And what it is that things happen slow enough that you really can't sit there and stare at it, and there's not a lot of resource management or anything. So it happens just slow enough that my distraction brain kind of loops back to the thing I was working on before, and then every now and again I'm like, ooh, does he have enough grass for me to get another upgrade?
Well, it looks adorable, visually. So I think I might check this out at some point. Although, yeah, like I said, I don't know. I might get distracted, but I also work on a computer that I really can't install my own stuff on at work. So this would have to be on one day where I work from home. But this is super cute. Yeah, so it's Rapuka's Idle Island, and idle, I thought it was IDOL. It's IDLE, which makes a lot more sense because it's idle. It's idling on your screen, which, anyway, brain fart today. It's Sunday. Everyone's got to forgive me.
I feel like idle, IDOL, and Idle Island would be much more distracting. So that just
all this Survivor, the TV show Survivor stuff came up, and I was like, are you voting people off your desktop while you're playing? That would be distracting. So I've been watching, I mentioned on last week's episode that I've been watching The Last of Us Season 1, or rewatching it. At that point, I'd gotten to the beginning of Episode 3, which is, Lloyd, I don't know if you've watched The Last of Us or you're familiar with that world, but there's a very famous, so there's a very famous queer episode.
Yes.
Yeah, and it's the tear jerker episode. And it on a second watch through, it's definitely still a tearjerker. That's the episode Long Time. And then for anyone who wants a sapphic storyline in the same show, there's also episode 7, which is called Left Behind. But when we got to the end of the season, I was like, oh, I have an itch to go back and play the second game because I wanted to know what happened next. I know what happens next, obviously, but I wanted to replay The Last of Us, and I have the remastered version of Last of Us Part 2. So I booted that up for the first time, and it looks gorgeous, even in performance mode. And for anyone who doesn't know, performance mode is they lower the resolution, but they increase the frame rate. And I didn't find the resolution to be that low. I thought it looked really good. And then 60 FPS obviously is like buttery smooth.
Well, best of luck on that journey. That's always exciting, like revisiting a property that I've either like watched it or played it a long time ago, and just always the second time through, I find, like, I don't know if I've changed as a person between then and now, but there's always like, it always just feeds a different part of me. So that's exciting.
Yeah, it's the same for me too. I'm always like, I always bring new experiences to it because like I've changed a bit, but also I usually hold off playing something I really, really loved because I'm scared I won't like it as much the second time, or I'm scared I gaslit myself for the first time into thinking I didn't really enjoy it, but I enjoyed it more than I actually did, or I'm like nostalgic for it, and then I go back and like, because another game I went back to start playing, I actually started like last night right before bedtime. I've been listening to a bunch of podcasts and YouTube videos about speculation for the new Pokemon game because like it's getting to that time now where it's been a year since we last heard anything, and I just want to know more. And Pokemon Day is coming up, so I just decided to jump back into Legends Arceus, and I was scared that it wouldn't hold up the second time, and it, just like The Last of Us Part 2, like I'm really enjoying, even though I've only played like 20 minutes of Legends Arceus, like just going back into that world and like hiding in the tall grass and like sneaking up on Pokemon and throwing Pokeballs and crafting them and everything. Like it's super exciting and it definitely holds up. So
very cool, very cool.
Are you a Pokemon fan at all?
I am, and unfortunately I'm a bad one.
No, that's not possible.
That's fair. I think I'm just more self-critical because growing up, like my first Pokemon game was being handed a cartridge of Pokemon Yellow from my cousin on the elementary school playground, and in retrospect, I have no idea where he got this. But anyways, and so booting it up and like, oh, like, and then just like the magic of it, and then getting each game as it came out. And I think Sapphire was the last one that I like very religiously would get each game for. And then I took a real long break. Then I think I got Moon, played it a tiny bit, and then let's see. My brain's having a moment. I think Let's Go, Eevee, maybe. No. There was, what was the Pokemon generation where you could connect it to Pokemon Go or something?
Oh, that was the one. You had it right.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it was Let's Go Eevee and Pikachu.
Yes, I remember that, and that was like my like reintroduction into like the more modern, or closer to the more modern Pokemons, and I was like, oh, this is wonderful. And then I think I got Sword, didn't finish it. As soon as I got to the open world, which is not terribly long into the game for anyone who hasn't played that generation, I just got obsessed with camping and making curry for my Pokemon, and just,
I mean, that's fair.
Did not progress very far, but yes, I haven't played Arceus, but it's all just sounds wonderful and magical, and every time I see more like news stories or content or updates, I'm like, ooh, Pokemon, ooh.
Well, I do recommend. Again, the Pokemon games aren't visually. The one issue I have going back to Legends Arceus, like even at the time, I'm usually kind of blinded by like, I don't even know if blinded is the right word, but like I'm usually like, I have like these goggles on of like, oh, it's a new Pokemon game. I don't care what it looks like. I just have to like consume the new Pokemon game. But Legends Arceus, like going back to it, like there's one spot where you're like right at the beginning of the game when you first enter like this big open area, and there's like this like shading issue where you see like globs of purple in the world. And at first I was like, oh yeah, are these globs of purple? Like I had the same thought I had when I first played it, was like, are these globs of purple like some kind of corruption in the world? And no, it's just bad lighting rendering, like really bad lighting rendering. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, there's another spot where you're like in the tall grass and like the grass is like right in the frame, like right up at eye level basically, and you can see it like right up close to the screen, and it looks kind of very not great, but I'm hoping that the next Pokemon, whatever they do on the Switch 2, will be a lot better looking, because I think really the gameplay is like fine. I just want them to make the games look just like a little bit better. So
that makes sense.
So let's move on to the news, because there is a lot of it this week. And thank you so much for joining me again for covering the news, because I've been covering the news all by myself the last few episodes, and I thought I would change it up, and this time I would do the segment by myself, and this time I would have someone cover the news with me. So the first story here comes from IGN, and this one is, well, there's a few loaded political stories in here where stuff starts bleeding into games a little bit, unfortunately, but this first story from IGN is, Trump's tariffs on video games would cause significant harm to everyday Americans, the ESA warns. So again, I'm sure everyone has heard about the clown show going on right now in the US. Lloyd, I'm sure you definitely have heard of it because that's where you live.
Yeah.
But this is specifically about the tariffs, which have also been a great source of pain here in Canada, because they've decided to kind of sort of not start a trade war with us with the tariffs. But the Entertainment Software Association says that the tariffs, which include video game components that come from China, could hurt video games in the US. So the whole situation is kind of complicated in terms of how specifically the tariffs would affect American gamers. But the quote from the ESA says, in an updated statement to IGN, the ESA called on the Trump administration to speak with the private sector, quote, to find ways to sustain the economic growth supported by our sector, unquote. Video games are one of the most popular and beloved forms of entertainment for Americans of all ages. Tariffs on video game devices and related products would negatively impact hundreds of millions of Americans and would harm the industry's significant contributions to the U.S. economy. We look forward to working with the administration and Congress to find ways to sustain the economic growth supported by our sector. The ESA represents several major video game companies, including Microsoft, Nintendo, Sony Interactive Entertainment, Square Enix, Ubisoft, Epic Games, and Electronic Arts. So, I'm not sure what your take on this, Lloyd, is, but the obvious ways I think that tariffs will affect everyday American gamers is that the price of consoles, which are assembled in China, would go up due to the tariffs on imports from China specifically. And North American optical discs, so like if you're buying physical media on a disc, like a PS5 game or an Xbox Series game, they would also go up because those discs are exclusively now manufactured in Mexico. And even though I think they did end up delaying the tariffs from Mexico to March 1st, I think if and when those tariffs start, the cost of discs are going to go up, and then the cost of games are going to go from, which is the US price is $70 for like a AAA game. It's probably going to go up to 80 or 90 or maybe even $100. And then some people too are also worried that the Switch 2 could be more expensive because those components come from China as well. But I'm curious what your thoughts are on this, Lloyd.
Yeah. A lot of moving parts, right? And one of the things, like with the digital versus physical media for video games, I remember when, I don't know if it was like during like the PlayStation 3 era, but they started like kind of pushing, digital. And like part of the popular consensus was, okay, games could be cheaper now because it's removing several steps of production. It's removing printing, creating the discs, the packaging, shipping, things will be cheaper. But, as history's shown us, that didn't happen. They just kept the pricing the exact same, physical versus digital. And I could definitely, like, in like a vacuum, I could see, maybe with the tariffs and everything, maybe games will then push even further into the digital realm to try to protect profit margins as much as possible. And I could definitely see that happening. But as far as American consumers of video games, I feel like the price of living is going to go up astronomically in so many sectors that I think that I would be really interested to see what the end consumer numbers are for video games. There's not going to be a lot of disposable income, in my opinion.
Right.
And so to see, a lot of companies and a lot of industries really weigh, American consumption and North American consumption of their, like watching movies or playing certain video games very heavily, and how they decide if a product is successful. And so if with all of these changes that's going to be happening, American consumers aren't going to be able to consume, I think that's going to really, really throw the industry for a loop because, I know, Japanese numbers are really important because there's a lot of companies that, like Nintendo and everything really focused over there as well, but it'll be interesting to see, and I think this is just going to be one of many industries that's going to be affected. I am a little curious about, like Steam or like other companies that, distribute, especially like physical, the opposite of that, digital versions of games. Very interested to see how that's going to impact like indie games. I know usually like with tariffs, when the experts really get talking about like the nitty gritty about how that affects the economy in certain areas, they always say that it ends up being the consumers that really, the price runs downhill and the consumer ends up picking that up. So that's
Yeah.
kind of where I'm seeing this going.
I'm also curious too. You actually you kind of touched on this a little bit, but you made me think it also might affect like the actual production of games. So you're saying like, oh, maybe
Mm,
digital games will be unaffected, but and obviously we've seen too where digital takes out a lot of the cost of manufacturing and all these other things. So they could pass that cost on to that savings on to the consumers, but they don't. But now I'm
mm,
wondering too, like even digital games, like if cost of living is going up, if there's tariffs on other parts of of other industries, and video games also cross over with a lot of those other industries. I wonder if like just game budgets are going to increase astronomically too because of all the tariffs across the board.
mm. That's a really good point. There's more than just once the game is done, it's not just magically done. There's all of these, like salaries and everything that goes into the before times. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and so like you mentioned Steam too, right? So like what will Steam do and how will they react? Well, if Steam's operating budget goes up because of the tariffs, and I don't have
Mm,
any specific examples of like what specifically would happen inside Steam and what other things they need to be able to operate that would be affected by tariffs, but we could also see Steam change their prices, or I know Steam lets the developers dictate the price, and I think they take 10% of whatever the price is. So if Steam decided maybe, hey, we actually need to take 20% now, or even 30%, which is what I think Switch
wow.
and PlayStation take, um, maybe those developers are forced to increase the price of their games too. I don't know.
Mm, yeah, and that could have a lot of negative impacts. And I always think about indie developers when, you know, these sorts of big things happen because sometimes you hear stories about, they try so hard to find a price point that's going to reach their audience while also just attempting to get them the value that they deserve for their product. And that dance is always so fine, and to then add the potential for maybe Steam or other platforms would want more out of them. It's a sad story.
Yeah, I'm. The future's very uncertain. And speaking of uncertain futures and the price of the Switch too, like we were talking about earlier, I'm going to segue into our terrible segue into our next news story because we have a lot to cover. Nintendo has said that they will quote consider the affordability customers expect unquote, and this comes from Video Games Chronicle. So in the article they said during a Q&A following Nintendo's Q3 financial results, Nintendo president Shuntaro Furukawa was asked about the company's thoughts on hardware pricing. Specifically, Furukawa was asked if there was any change to Nintendo's stance on what constitutes an acceptable price point, given various global economic factors, which is definitely a loaded statement there.
Mm,
Furukawa replied that not only does Nintendo have to take into account Japan's increased inflation rate, it also has to consider that the exchange rate environment has changed considerably since the Switch launched in 2017. However, he noted that Nintendo also has to consider, quote, the affordability that our customers expect from Nintendo products, unquote, saying that the company needs to take all these factors into account when considering the price of its products. Furukawa said it was taking all of the above into account when pricing the Switch, but that it had nothing to announce at this time. He also said that there are no plans to change the price of the original Switch at this time. So that's the article.
mm,
With the economy, the cost of living, exchange rates, inflation, everything we talked about, like the tariffs, all looming over the Nintendo Switch 2, I'm really not sure what the launch price was going to end up being in any market.
mm,
Yeah, it's like I know there's there was a lot of uproar and backlash. I don't know if you heard, Lloyd, about the PS5 Pro when it was announced. The price was like, at least in Canada, was almost $1,000 here, which was like a tough pill to swallow. And then, of course, PlayStation went and announced the exclusive version with the classic console design, and that version sold out really quickly. But we probably won't know the price of the Nintendo Switch 2 until April 2nd, when Nintendo has their big reveal direct for the console where they announce all the games and stuff. But I assume that no matter the price, the console is going to be hard to find at launch. It'll be during the holiday season when parents are buying for their kids. Because I think people are going to buy at launch no matter what. I think whether it's scalpers or fans, gamers like us. But I think during the holiday season when parents are buying for their kids and casual players are buying in is when we're going to see if this audience can stomach the price, which I think the minimum American price is probably going to be around $400. Which in Canada is almost $600, and that's just taking into consideration what's happening now with the cost of living, and that doesn't even consider the tariffs when I put that price as a prediction. So, your thoughts?
My goodness. Yeah. So my brain space, as I'm taking my age into account, I guess, is I have this sort of dual consciousness, might not be the right word, but I've got this idea of mobile gaming. Game Boy Color, all of the mobile games are, in my head, immediately cheaper or
Right.
less than a computer. But we're getting to the point in gaming, and we're getting to the point in the industry and technology where Switches, Steam Decks, all of these mobile things are an inferior technology. They're a portable computer. And so immediately when I hear about these like hundreds and hundreds of dollars for something that can be played in a car or on a bus or something, I immediately just, clutch my imaginary pearls. But, I catch myself and I'm like, well, where technology is, where the industry is, cell phones are expensive. So, we can't really, discount mobile devices or devices that can be mobile. And I would not be surprised if the Switch 2 is beefy, is hefty, because Nintendo's not one to undervalue themselves. They're not one to what's a nice they're not ones to not make money when they can. So with especially everything that's going on in every corner of the world, with whatever's gonna happen next few months, over the next year, next 4 years here in America, I could definitely see the Switch 2 being a pricey item, but that's just my opinion.
No, I think a pricey console is probably what we're looking at. Nintendo famously doesn't sell their consoles at a loss to get you to buy into the other. Like it's a pretty common practice in the tech industry to sell to get the TV to sell the TV at a loss, so they can go, oh look, it's a nice cheap television or a nice cheap console here, and then suddenly you're buying an extra controller, you're buying 2 or 3 games. In the case of TVs, you're buying boxes to go with it, or you're buying add-ons or speakers or movies. I know a lot of people don't buy physical media anymore. I'm one of the last few that still buys discs, but Nintendo doesn't do that. Nintendo's like Disney, where they're like, you're going to pay, or even Apple, where they're like, you're going to pay what we want you to pay, and you'll pay it because we know we make good products that you want. Yes. So I'm just curious if the cost of living is going to, how much, that's going to be a butting of the heads for sure, is that people are going to be like, well, how badly do I want this Nintendo Switch in a climate where things are so expensive now? So.
Absolutely. And like you mentioned, parents, buying them for Christmas. And I feel like it's approaching gaming in general, but especially the Switch 2 might be approaching a price point that might be a little bit harder for kids to, do their elevator pitch to their parents. Like, oh, I really want this. I remember when I asked for Game Boy Color, and I remember that was a big, it took a couple passes for them to even, love my parents. They've always supported me, but I remember it being okay, maybe.
Yeah, it was the same for me. So
yeah, so I can't imagine. I mean, I will see what happens, but I feel like that's gonna be a hard sell. But like you said, I agree with you that on launch, there's gonna be purchases, whether it's bots or otherwise. There's gonna be purchases.
Yeah. I hope it's reasonable enough. I do have a price point in my brain where I was like, I don't know if I'll pay that much. I think 600 Canadian is where I would stop. So if it goes higher than that, I hope it doesn't. But Speaking of the Switch 2 as well, there's a bunch of Nintendo news before we get to the beefy stories, but this is going to be a super quick one. Nintendo also announced the time slot for their April 2nd Direct, which we mentioned earlier. So it's going to be 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. in the UK, 10 p.m. in Japan, and there's a whole bunch of other time slots for that. Obviously, you can plug any of those times into Google to find your local time. But they've chosen the usual time slot for their usual Direct, so it shouldn't be too surprising if you've tuned in live before. They didn't say how long the Direct would be, but recent Directs have been around 40 minutes long, and the length of the Nintendo Switch 1 presentation in January 2017, which technically wasn't a Direct, it was a live showcase, but that was just over an hour, so I expect it to be somewhere in the ballpark of 40 minutes to an hour. As well, with the Switch 2, some Nintendo patents have leaked controller details for the Switch 2, so we now know that mouse functionality has been confirmed, and we also got a peek at what the Pro Controller will look like. So this is the last Switch 2 headline, I promise. It looks like some patents were published, and these come directly from Nintendo themselves, technically. They were published on a different website that files patents and stuff like that, but the patents themselves came directly from Nintendo, and I think Nintendo can only keep patents quiet for so long before they're published publicly. But we now know that the mouse functionality that's been rumored and quote-unquote leaked for a while, it's basically confirmed now through these patents. It's the second patent, though, that I think is much more exciting and worth talking about, because it's completely brand new information, but we know what the Pro Controller will look like. And basically, it looks very similar to the original Pro Controller, except it looks a little bit more boxy, and it splits into two pieces like the Joy-Cons do. And they are built in such a way that you can now kind of grip them with your fist and use them as mice as well.
Oh, wow.
On the table. Yeah. So, I don't know if you looked at the link I sent, but I think there's one picture of it in the Twitter link I sent below. I know going to Twitter is kind of like not the most ideal thing, but I think the image should at least load if you're not logged in. But I'll pull it up here and describe it for listeners. Yeah, it looks it basically looks like they look like Joy-Cons. Like, they're not shaped like the Joy-Cons, but it looks like the button layout is like the Joy-Cons, so there's no more D-pad anymore on the left part of the controller, because when you split it up, it obviously has to function as its own solo controller, I guess.
Okay.
So, which is a little disappointing, because I know a lot of people, myself included, really do like the D-pad on the Pro Controller. But going from the DualSense back to the original Switch Pro Controller, I don't think the Switch Pro Controller is all that great. So hopefully this is an improvement. Do you have any thoughts on this mouse functionality on a console?
I was trying to fight Twitter, but I finally got the prototype to open. When I saw the mouse compatibility, I was like, oh, that's interesting. I have a lot of questions, right? I have a lot of questions. I'm like, is this gonna be, Bluetooth? Is it gonna be like a proprietary mouse? Are they gonna be like what is the connectivity? Is it gonna be a USB? Like what? And I don't know how I feel. I think I'm conflicted because for accessibility, right? I absolutely love the idea of having multiple ways to engage with a gaming device. And so I'm interested, but I am very confused. Mainly because I'm very curious about, like how, once you start using the mouse portion, right, if it is gonna be their proprietary mice, then it would make sense. Maybe it would have like their extra buttons on it. But then if you can bring your own mouse, I'm a little confused about how that might translate into the gameplay or like what might be affected. But that's really cool.
Yeah, yeah, I don't know how I feel about mouse support on Nintendo. I hope it's optional. I hope it's part of me hopes that it's one of those features that Nintendo includes and then never uses in any of their games beyond like the first game they put out. So, but I've heard a lot of people talking about how this will be good for like anything like that requires point and click controls or any shooters like Splatoon or Call of Duty. Baldur's Gate 3 will probably be on Switch 2, and I think I've heard that like mouse and keyboard is much better for playing that game. I haven't tried it myself yet because I have so many games to play. I'm still waiting for a sale on that game, but so I guess more, like you said, more accessibility is a good thing. So I hope even if Nintendo kind of it falls by the wayside, I do hope it's an option in most games, even if it's not like, oh, you want to play the new Mario game, you have to use mouse support, but it's there as an option.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and another thing I'm thinking of is whenever a new technology, so many's on my brain. Like when the Rumble controllers first popped up, or like when you could touch the middle pad to control certain parts of the game. I remember whenever a new technology rolls out, they sort of always have like one video game or something that's like really focused on showcasing it. Like the name of the game should have been showcasing this new technology where every single interaction is going to use this thing. Um, so I'm picturing like maybe they're going to have some fun, cheeky games where the whole focus is going to be, okay, use the mouse, do this.
Yeah, well, we'll see, I guess. Obviously, we're going to find out more in the April 2nd Direct. And I guess I also, too, I haven't really talked about this too much on the show, but I joined the waitlist for the Nintendo Switch 2 experience that they're bringing to certain states and provinces, and also certain countries around the world, where you get to try the games early. And I suppose, like, I guess I'll get to try out I haven't thought about this. All I'm thinking about is, like, playing Mario Kart when I get to go to this event, because I got on the waitlist and I got a spot for the Sunday of the weekend that's in Toronto. But I guess I'll be able to try out this mouse functionality. And I guess if I really think about it, I'm much more curious about that than the new Mario Kart. Because like the Mario Kart's Mario Kart. We know what that's going to be. But like, what is the mouse controls going to be like in any game that they offer it with? So
well, that's exciting. That's exciting for you.
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
Oh, that's good. That's exciting that you get to go to that. I hadn't heard about that, but that sounds like a really good experience.
Yeah. I was a little upset at first because I didn't get tickets because there were so many people that entered the raffle. It's a free event, but it was as a raffle, like a lottery system, to avoid like a first come first serve system, I suppose. But then the wait list was first come first served. So I got on the wait list within the first couple of minutes, and I accidentally picked a group to go, and I was like, wait, I don't have a group to go with. So then within the first few minutes, I changed it back to one person, and I was like, oh, I bet that knocks me down the wait list. And then I woke up one morning, having a terrible week last week. Woke up one morning, I was so groggy, I was so tired, I hadn't slept enough, and then I got this email pop up that was like, oh, you're going. And I was like, oh, one good thing.
Yay.
So let's move on to the next news story, because like I said, there's still a couple big ones here. We've actually got 3 big news stories. Still, actually, I don't know how big this one, I would call this one, but I have a lot of thoughts on it. So the ESA, the Entertainment Software Association, which I mentioned earlier, creates an event called Icon with 2 lowercase i's instead of 1 I, a new industry event for games industry people. So we're not exactly sure what this is, but 30 years ago when the ESA created E3, it was basically an event centered around games industry people. It was created for networking so game creators could meet up with the press, distributors, and other industry people who could help get their game into the public eye, such through the news or making deals with stores to put their games on shelves, etc. So Icon, this new event, doesn't seem to be exactly that, but maybe it fills a hole that E3 created when it came to an end. So the description is, the Entertainment Software Association, ESA, today announced the launch of the Interactive Innovation Conference, Icon, a first-of-its-kind event designed to connect visionaries, thought leaders, and innovators from across industries to harness the power of interactive entertainment. Taking place April 27th to 30th, 2026, at the Fontainebleau Resort in Las Vegas, attendees will gain exclusive access to visionary keynotes, engaging discussions and workshops, and elite networking opportunities with executives shaping the future of entertainment, business, and technology. Icon promises to bring together a broad spectrum of sectors that converge with interactive entertainment, including film, television, music, as well as sports, healthcare, education, finance, and more. And it is invite only, and I don't see anything about including the press in this event, so it's definitely not the new version of E3 exactly. It's not something for the public, especially if the press won't be included to even go back and then like report on it, for example. So curious, what are your initial thoughts having heard that, Lloyd?
Oh my goodness. It might just be me not being on the pulse of things, but it sounded like an awful lot, and I don't know what it's going to be about. Like, like, it sounds like a brand new, shiny, wonderful thing, but I don't know what's going to be in it.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, I guess anyone reading this is like, my brain was like, okay, but like, what does this mean for games specifically?
Yeah.
And it sounds like, I think at most it would be like what E3 was in terms of like a meeting of the minds, where, you know, if you're in the games industry and you're a developer or a small publisher and you're like, hey, I need to talk to the executives at GameStop, but I don't have a connection with them. If I go to this event, I could meet up with people who can get my game into stores on shelves, But that's also a 30-year-old sentiment when in the 90s you didn't have digital games. So you can't just like put your game on the storefront. You needed to get someone to get the game onto you needed to get to meet with multiple middlemen to then get your game onto the shelves at Walmart or GameStop or I don't even know if GameStop was around in the 90s or what they were called, but here in Canada they were called Electronics Boutique before they were bought out. So
oh wow.
But yeah, I don't like Nintendo's involved. So the thing I do think is interesting about this though is Nintendo is involved in this specific event, and Nintendo wasn't really closely involved with E3 towards the end, as far as I know. And they're they're very much not interested in the stuff that Jeff Keighley is doing with like Summer Games Fest and the Game Awards. Like they show up for awards and stuff, but they don't partner with Jeff Keighley to really show off too many new games, like other developers do. Like Sony revealing their new Naughty Dog game at the Game Awards this year. Nintendo would never do that for one of their own games, for a big game from one of their biggest, like they'd never revealed the new Zelda at the Game Awards. They did 10 years ago, but I don't think they would do that now. So the fact that Nintendo was involved in this though, sorry to cut you off, but the fact that Nintendo was involved in this gives me some hope that like this is a good event worth going to because Nintendo's involved, but also because Nintendo's involved, I don't think we're going to hear anything about this from anyone ever.
That's a really good point. And as soon as you started mentioning Nintendo, I was like, you're right. They've really kind of used their own platforms, their own events, their own anything for at least the last 5 years to announce anything worth announcing from Nintendo. So to hear that they're getting involved in this, maybe like you said, it's going to be a little bit more like E3 used to be, but with a slightly different climate. Something that Nintendo has decided that they want to be involved in. Not that they would be the only reason this exists, but it would be very interesting to see how this would manifest and be different than what we've seen before.
Yeah, let's hope the press, it is invite only. Let's hope the press is invited. So it'd be cool to go back to a time, at least for my own nostalgic purposes, where you're chomping at the bit waiting to hear what's going on. Because like when E3 happens now, we get it all in real time on the internet, but it would be really cool to kind of go back to that nostalgic feeling of like, waiting for IGN, for example, to like report back, yes, okay, we played the new Zelda on the show floor. Here's what we thought of it. Here's like a few little screen grabs that you're going to pour over for the next year and a half before the game comes out. I think that would be really cool if we could go back to a time like that when things were, I dare say, simpler in some ways, but not simpler in other ways. I actually want to go back to the 90s. That was not great for queer people. We've progressed since then, or at least we should have been progressing. But just from like that gaming magazine type days when you were waiting for stuff from the show floor. Are you nostalgic for any of that stuff? Old gaming experiences?
Yeah, one thing that I remember is back when GameStop was the GameStop. They had Game Informer, and Game Informer eventually, it was a magazine, and it eventually became its own like separate subscription. But back in like the heyday, it was kind of just something that you got when you had like a GameStop membership and you paid for your annual membership. And oh, Game Informer, this is this new thing we have here. You get to have this. And so Game Informer would be something that would come in the mail monthly, and it would have, and I would just pour over this. I remember just spending all of my time just reading it, and it would include different articles about games that either just came out, haven't come out yet, announcements, just all things, and it would be about games that I would never even really play. But I just remember I have some nostalgia for that way of delivering gaming news, kind of like when you were talking about like now you can just like you get a notification, your phone's decided an alert, you've looked at a couple gaming things, so here's the newest thing, when you're not even really prepared or hyped up to see it. So yeah, I have some nostalgia for that too.
Yeah. I mean, I never had Game Informer, although I did buy the last issue that they published last year. I saw it at GameStop, and I was like, okay, I'm going to buy this for, like, posterity's sake. But when I was a kid, I was subscribed to Nintendo Power.
Okay.
Because they always, I think, with the games you would buy, there'd be a little card that came with it you could mail in, and they'd be like, okay, the first issue is free, and then after that, you subscribe for, like, whatever. And I think I begged my mom. I was like, please, you have to let me subscribe to this. And for a while, like, I still had the internet, obviously, but it was at a time when, like, we had one shared computer in the house. So, like, I was, like, afforded time on it, like, maybe once every couple of days. And that's when I would go to IGN at the time, which is the only gaming site that I really knew of that wasn't, like, Nintendo's own website, for example. So, my big, like, one of the, like, the big thing every month was, like, okay, what's Nintendo got to say in Nintendo Power? Because usually at the time, too, like, news wasn't so reactionary, it wasn't so immediate. So like it wasn't like, oh, Nintendo Power announced a new game and it's online before you can even actually look at the magazine. At the time, it was like if there was something new in the Nintendo Power, it was new to you because it was new to everyone. So I miss those days. I don't think we're ever going to get them back though. So Video Games Chronicle in our next news story has, this is a loaded thing here, but Take-Two CEO Strauss Zelnick says AI could increase employment and productivity as long as IP isn't infringed. So to quote the article, the bottom line is that these are digital tools and we've used digital tools forever. I have no doubt that what is considered AI today will help make our business more efficient and help us to do better work, but it won't reduce employment. To the contrary, the history of digital technology is that technology increases employment, increases productivity, increases GDP, and I think that's what's going to happen with AI. I think the video game business will probably be on the leading, if not bleeding edge of using AI. Zelnick then acknowledged that the argument that AI can result in infringement of other creators' intellectual properties and copyrights, but added that he can think of no other concerns besides this. In terms of the guardrails, he says, if you mean not infringing on other people's intellectual property by poaching their large language models, yeah, we're not going to do that, he said. Moreover, if we did, we couldn't protect that. We wouldn't be able to protect our own IP. So of course, we're mindful of what technology we use to make sure that it respects others' intellectual property and allows us to protect our own. Apart from that, I really can't think of any new guardrails that need to be implemented. So I think he's not looking at this. I mean, he's a CEO. I'm not going to say he doesn't know how to do his job, but I think there's no way that's the only guardrail is the IP problem, which is also a pretty big one because we're not just talking about like, oh yeah, we're using other major game studios' IP. It's like they're feeding so much art and content from random people, not just companies, into these learning models to then generate like content that is based on your own content, but just slightly different. So it's considered generative AI. So I don't know. What are your initial thoughts on this? Hearing that he thinks there's only one guardrail and it's not a big deal, like the way he makes it sound.
Oh gosh, yeah. So a lot of things come to mind. My first thought is what they're gonna do is they're gonna keep coming out with the different CEO statements. I think they're gonna take turns with this, trying to normalize AI in the gaming industry, because I feel like we get one of these, maybe not from a CEO, but from someone every 3-4 months or so. And oh gosh, I'm like, okay, what's first, Lloyd? With the caveat, all new technology is met with resistance, and that's like the big thing that they use when they advocate for AI. But unfortunately, since it's new, like this level of generative AI is so new and so fast, and it just keeps developing faster and faster. There's no sort of, there's no really, as far as I know, maybe they've been working on it since I've checked in on this, but there's no real regulation, especially not here in America. There's no like regulation going on. AI is a really broad term, right? Like Clippy from Microsoft days was AI technically. So there's a lot of, I can see functionality that can be really helpful, from like, math standpoints with certain like programming elements, generating, the asset to, repeat multiple times while you're developing your game. There's certain levels of it that I could think would be really excellent, really wonderful. But because of like where the industry is right now and how it is such a AI is real bad or AI is gonna save humanity, I think like you've highlighted, his idea of there's only one big concern is not based in reality.
Well, yeah, because he also says, like, I think the thing that also rubs me the wrong way is that he says, like, it's going to create jobs and save jobs. And I really want to know what his thought process is on that, because, like, game budgets keep ballooning every year. Game scope keeps ballooning every year. And then also you want the game to be, like, bigger and better and also more graphically impressive. So everything just keeps ballooning. So, like, I can see having some AI processes in place to maybe allow that growth to continue, but also not bog down the current developers that are working on the game, to not make those developers lose their jobs because these games are becoming unaffordable to make because you have to keep hiring more people, and then the return on investment just isn't worth it. But I think eventually, if you it's a slippery slope. I think if you make these tools that make people's jobs easier, their jobs are saved for now, but then suddenly you're like, oh, okay, well, we're using AI for this. Why don't we use AI for something else here? And before you know it, AI is replacing people. Like when I go to Walmart, or when I go to, I don't really like going to Walmart, but sometimes it's the cheapest way to get food, but you go to any grocery store, any place with a checkout line, for example, and half the checkouts now are self-checkouts with one or two people manning the area in case there's issues. And then usually all the checkouts that were there before still exist. Like let's say a store has like 20 human ran checkouts. There's still only like 5 or 6 people. At most, half of those checkouts are actually operational at any given time. And so I would be very surprised to know that they have actually hired more cashiers because they also have the self-checkouts. Because the self-checkouts are always packed. There's always one in use. But the lines for the people, the humans, are always so short. So you're telling me, I just don't believe the idea that like this technology actually leads to more jobs. And that's a very specific example. And maybe there's different ones that help, that hinder my argument. But I'm curious what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, and it adds to because I had a very similar impression. It just felt like it was a lot of word soup. Like the CEO was like, okay, what are people interested in? Okay, protecting jobs. There's been, like writers' strikes. Okay, so, like it kind of just, it feels like word soup. Like, what do you mean it's going to create jobs? What is going to be opening up that's going to, you as the CEO, encourage you or your company to hire more people? Like, that doesn't, like, even like on a very basic numbers level, if anything, that's saving you money. Why would you hire somebody else if this is going to, expedite the process of game development? And that's not even, like, I'm purposefully not even touching, like, art and visual AI, because that's a whole can of worms that once it is normalized and allowed, I think all video games are going to look the exact same. Once we get to a point where if, like, for graphic design and asset design and visual design, once we get to a point where that is normalized and, it's going to technically save a lot of money because you don't have to have whole art directors, art teams, like, it can be, like, absolutely just destroyed. Like, there's very little about AI that has proven that it creates jobs. Maybe I'm just looking at the wrong data, but that's been their big selling point this whole time, and it's never really come to fruition.
That's fair. I mean, I don't really have too much to say in response to that because I feel exactly the same. So we're almost done here. We have one more news story, and this one, depending on how you look at it, it could be bad news because it is a bit of a fence sitter story from the game developer, but it does lead to more queer content that is actually pretty positive. So I think I'm going to take this one as like a little victory. But anyway, this comes from PC Gamer, and they said Kingdom Come Deliverance 2's developer is, quote, fed up, unquote, of being dragged into the culture war. He said, it seems like someone is always trying to brand us somehow, and we are just trying to make a cool video game. So like I said, at first glance, this seems like a giant red flag, but I promise when the Warhorse devs are saying this, they're mostly good guys. I also just want to say this is a pretty nuanced article, so please go to the show notes and click on the link and check out the article when you can. Form your own opinions, walk away with your own take on this. Because again, we're not going to have time to go too deep into this. This is like, you could spend hours arguing about this like fence sitter argument and the way he talks about the culture war to see how we really might actually feel under the surface. But some key quotes from the article here. Tobias Stoltz-Zwilling is bemoaning the fact that once again, the Kingdom Come Deliverance II studio has found itself embroiled in the exhausting culture war. Back in 2017, before the launch of the first Kingdom Come Deliverance, the game was caught in some flack from critics who questioned its lack of people of color, and if that was truly historically accurate. This prompted some genuinely interesting discussions about medieval Europe and its portrayal, but it also saw battle lines being drawn. Some wrote the game off as an ahistorical, overly homogenous view of I can't pronounce this. I've never been able to pronounce this country. Czechia, I think. Whilst others rushed to its defense and celebrated it for pushing back the woke agenda, unquote. And this was all before most people had even played it. Game director Daniel Vavra's support for Gamergate only served to fuel the flames. And we're not even going to get into Gamergate today. Now the same crowd that pretended to care about the historical accuracy have turned on Warhorse, all because Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 features an optional gay romance, yay, and a larger array of non-white, non-Christian characters, also yay. While the studio continues to use the expertise of its in-house historian, Joanna Nowak, and is just as obsessed with historical authenticity as before, now it's apparently been pressured into becoming woke by a shadowy cabal of evil leftists. Scary. It is, of course, laughable, or would be if it hadn't inspired an outpouring of bigotry and abuse, all because some folk are just trying to make a video game. Quote, several years ago we were branded differently, says Stolzwilling. Now we are just branded that way. It seems like someone is always trying to brand us somehow, and we are just trying to make a cool video game. He's adamant there is no agenda here, just video game developers doing their job. Developers who are now pretty fed up of being dragged into someone else's war. That's the end of the part of the article that I'm quoting. But I just think that, quote, just making a video game, unquote, is rarely ever just that. There's stuff in this article that comes from these devs that I do not agree with. I don't think there's really should be a culture war, and that having gay characters should be a part of it, but not knowing that you're not putting a gay character into a game. You must have known something was going to happen. Backlash from somebody, and then not including, on the other hand, not including people of color in your previous game, or not including gay characters in your previous game, was also going to upset a different group of people. So I think the ignorance on their part, or the feigning of ignorance, is kind of like a red flag to me. And it's also a bit fence-sittery, which like rubs me the wrong way as centrist, because I see a lot of centrists say like, well, both sides are extreme. Well, one side is advocating for human rights and inclusion, which are all good things that hurt no one, and the other side is literally calling for murder and genocide. Like, to say that these are two extremes is like wild to me, and I don't agree with that. However, all that said, and I'll get your thoughts in a second here, Lloyd, but I think their lack of an agenda, so to speak, has also gotten another queer-ish game in Kingdom Come Deliverance II. And that's the real news here, is that despite a group of people being fence-sitters during a time when representation is at its most necessary, they still chose to launch a game with gay and POC representation. And I do think that's a good thing at the end of the day.
Yeah, and wow, what a wild ride that was. But, yeah, and it's fascinating to see that they would have such a mid at best, poor at worst read take to being called out for some of the lack of representation in the first game. But then to turn around and inject some of those elements that they were missing into their second one. Like you said, end of the day, that's the win. But it's always so interesting. Gaming, we've talked about it. I know you've talked about it in other episodes. As an industry as a whole, it has a lot of work to do. And it's not, in some circles, it's still very popular to be bigots in any form, whether it's focusing on a particular ethnicity or a particular sexuality, or it's trendy still in certain circles. And we saw this when Assassin's Creed, whenever they come out with a new title that has anyone who's not like their stock, white or other acceptable male main characters, and that was in heavy quotes, by the way.
Fair.
We see huge waves of dissent or discussion, but I digress a bit on that. Yeah, at the end of the day, that's a huge win, and I'm just so tired of the historical accuracy. I don't know if it fit as well with this story, but with historical accuracy being weaponized when folks see something in a game, any sort of diversity in a game where it has a historical sort of lens to it, and they're like, oh, that wasn't historically accurate, they didn't exist then. No, that's that's not. First of all, this is a video game. You need to have a willing suspension of disbelief for a lot of things, and especially if the games, not so much this one, but especially if the games have an element of magic or any sort of any sort of fiction or fantasy element to them. Like, these games aren't being consumed by the people that existed at that time. They're being consumed by modern audiences that want to see themselves represented in these games. And the pushback for needing games to be more historically accurate, or is this historically accurate, to me it always feels like that's the landing point they landed on. That's like, yeah, I can say this, where otherwise they would be, what actually upset them wasn't the historical inaccuracies, it was the representation. But they can't say that. They kind of stop themselves from saying that that's the problem, if they have a degree of consciousness. But
Right.
so then they translate that to themselves and go a little bit further, and they go, oh, but I can call out historical inaccuracies. That's a neutral thing. That's a thing that is based on some degree of logic that I can rationalize. So that's kind of that's what I feel, and that's what I hear whenever there's like any sort of wave of, oh, there's woke stuff here. Ew.
Well, I think everything you said, I agree with 100%. I want to go back to what you said about these games are not being consumed by the audience that the historical period is based on. It's being consumed by people now, and people want to see themselves represented. I think that's a really good way to look at it, because sometimes when I'm like thinking about things, like I get too embroiled in like, okay, how do I see this, or how does the game exist in its own vacuum? But realistically speaking, like when you're playing any video game now, like historical accuracies or not, people are playing these games who have diverse perspectives, diverse backgrounds, diverse identities. And yeah, like whether a game is historically accurate or inaccurate doesn't matter, because like at least one queer person is likely to play your game, right? So and anyway, people want to see themselves represented. So I don't have really anything to add. I just like what you had to say. Because otherwise I agree with everything that you said. I think you're completely 100% right. And it's not up for debate.
Yeah, and one queer character and one queer side story, one queer anything isn't going to ruin or blow up your experience of the game. Like, it's the rest of the game's still going to exist.
Yeah, especially since in this case, specifically, they say it's optional. And honestly, all video games are optional. You don't have to play any game that you do not want to play.
Oh, that's so good. I love that.
On that note, Kingdom Come Deliverance II is available now, I believe, and it has an optional gay character and lots of POC characters. Again, despite however you feel about the devs, that this is a genre of game you're interested in, purchase it knowing there's some queer representation in there. But for now, that is all our news for this week. So Lloyd, I just want to say thank you for joining me. I know you're heading out after this and it'll just be me. So I just wanted to say, once again, thank you for joining me this week to cover the news.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a blast.
Yeah, I hope to have you on again soon. Next, I'm going to take a short break, and when I get back, I'll be discussing Raptor Boyfriend and Psychroma, the games of Toronto-based video game developer Rocket Adrift. Welcome back, True Avatars. So it's just me right now, and I'm going to talk about, for this week's segment, Rocket Adrift. Rocket Adrift, for anyone who doesn't know, is a small queer indie game studio based in Toronto, Canada, which is where I'm from. They're a team of 3 people, Sloan Smith, Lindsay Rollins, and Titus McNally. Their mission statement, which comes directly from their website, is as follows. Our mission as a developer is to tell personal narratives that highlight the perspectives of LGBTQIA2S+ and BIPOC experiences, while also showcasing an outsider lens to Canadian culture. We aim to emotionally enrich underrepresented players through gameplay and storytelling, and endear others to the struggles of our diverse characters with humor and unflinching honesty. Additionally, on their itch.io page, they mention that they are a team of neurodivergent, trans, and black game developers. So they've made a few games, but the 2 I'm going to be talking about today are the 2 that I've played, which I loved, and their most recent games too. Raptor Boyfriend, a high school romance, and Psychroma. So I've discussed Rocket Adrift a few times on the show, and many of the developers I've actually had on the show also know Rocket Adrift or know of Rocket Adrift, and I've definitely mentioned them on the show before. So I thought I should probably play their games. And I'm glad I did, because they're amazing, and I loved both of them. But first up, I'm going to talk about Psychroma. So I'm going to try not to spoil it too much. I will do a little bit of a spoilery section towards the end of the show. So don't worry too much about spoilers in this initial discussion. But if you have played the game and you do want to hear my thoughts, stick around to the end. So Psychroma actually came out last year, I think in June 2024. And the Steam summary is as follows. So, Psychroma is a psychological horror side-scroller set in a haunted cyberpunk house. Collect cards and explore the memories stored on them to piece together your past. But the deeper you go, the more you expose yourself to the brightest heat, the warmest color. So, if that sounds weird to you, it should, because this game is very weird, it's very psychedelic, and most importantly, it's very, very queer. So it's only available on PC as far as I know, on Steam and itch. I really do hope it's coming to other consoles because I think more people having the opportunity to play this would only be a good thing. But like I said, there's plenty of queer characters. The player character, Hayes, I'm pretty sure is non-binary. There is one sapphic or possibly bisexual character in Agatha. And there's also a spoilery character that's trans femme. I'm not going to discuss that person here too much because that is part of the story and a bit of a spoiler. And I know I said I wouldn't spoil anything, but I do think for anyone who's interested, they should know that there is some trans feminine representation in the game. There's also a ton of body swapping, but it's kind of a different type of body swapping. So there's this major mechanic where you collect these cards, like it's in the description, but you insert these cards into like a machine, and then you hook yourself up to the machine. You put this headset on, and then like these two like eye things, like these two cords come out of nowhere and like attach to your like directly to your eyeballs. It's kind of scary, to be honest. I don't like anything touching my eyes. I'm sure many people don't, but it freaks me out a little bit watching it. But basically, and also in this process too, you snap open a pill and inhale the powder that's inside this pill. And then once you do all this stuff, you enter someone else's memories. So you're walking around in someone else's body. And again, I'm going to come back to some spoilery stuff later on this, but do keep that in mind if you're interested. But yeah, it's really cool. You get to like inhabit other people's bodies. So like, it's really good for like exploring. I'm sure if this existed in real life too, this would be good for like exploring your gender identity. So, but ultimately this mechanic is also really about looking for an item. For example, like you're using it to solve puzzles basically. Like you go back to get some backstory, but then for example, there'll be one scene where someone drops like an important item under like the stove and they go, oh, well, we're not going to be able to get that now. Like that's never coming. We're never reaching that. So then you go to back to the present day and you go and find that tool, that item under the stove. And then you're like, oh, okay, I can now progress forward. So it does help solve some of the puzzliness of it. But like I said, there's also a big, as in the description, I mean, there's also a big focus on colors in the game. Not just in the design and the visuals, but in what they represent as well. There's a lot of stuff too. This game is like really loaded. So like, I'm not sure I've played the game twice, by the way, and I'm not sure I've processed every detail. Like it's still percolating in my brain. And to be honest, it's kind of one of those things that I think I'll be thinking about for a long time. And I think a lot of the best creative stories and the best creative pieces of art and the best, just like in general, the best art is like the stuff that sticks with you for a long time and you're like constantly thinking about. So this is definitely one of those games. I can't imagine anyone playing this and not thinking about it, even if you didn't end up enjoying the game, which would be surprising to me. But if it wasn't to your taste, like I'd still think you'd be thinking about it. Like, for example, they do compare the game to Blade Runner in some respects. And the first time I ever watched Blade Runner, I'm going to be honest, I didn't like it. I've come around on it since, so don't worry. I do enjoy it, but I was still thinking about that movie for a very long time, even though I didn't really vibe with it at first. The ideas in it just kept me coming back to those thoughts. So I think Psychroma is a game, again, where you will probably be coming back to it. And maybe like the fact that you keep coming back to it, like for me, for Blade Runner, I kept thinking about it, kept coming back to it. And that's what made me eventually enjoy it. So I do recommend you give this game a chance, even if it doesn't sound like it's up your alley. And please also, when you're done listening to this podcast, please go look, or even right now, like pause the podcast, go look up this game on Steam, take a look at the visuals. Cause it's like, I can only describe so much before you need to just like see what the game looks like, watch the trailer, hear what it sounds like. Because it's definitely like its own aesthetic in a way. Like they compare it to like Blade Runner, Akira, and Ghost in the Shell, and those comparisons are definitely apt for sure, especially inspiration wise. But it's really its own thing. So I would even argue it's got a little Matrixiness to it, but maybe that's just because I apply a lot of transness to the Matrix in retrospect. But it does have this dark, scary 16-bit look. It sometimes looks like a Super Nintendo or a Sega Genesis game, but then at other times, like the pixel art, like they go in for close-ups of the characters, and it looks a lot more detailed than anything from those consoles. And like I said before, the game is really about memory, and everything like the characters, the queerness, and the colors does tie into this idea of memory and what it really means. You start off by trying to solve some puzzles, and then the mystery of who you hurt your romantic partner, and then you realize that Hayes has become entangled in this. Hayes is the main character, as I mentioned, becomes entangled in this bunch of mysteries that are themselves entangled together, and you have to you have to go into the memories to figure out what's going on, but also like the story is about the character's memory. And I'm not going to spoil too much, but I do have some theories about what the ending means and all this other stuff, but like I said, memory is a huge core element to it. Not just thematically, but just like, and again, this is going to sound silly, but like just the idea of memory, like memory is that every time you turn a corner, there's something to do with memory. So again, like you could write essays and theses on this game and still not come to like a concrete conclusion, I think, in terms of interpretation. But ultimately, this game and what I think the reason I'm talking about it on this podcast, not just because it's a great game made by queer developers, but also it's about a bunch of lost queer souls who all live in a house together in future post-apocalyptic Toronto. They're a dysfunctional found family, and if that's not queer, I don't know what is. And the game really does start to like, they're not in their happiest days. Like I don't think there were ever really happy days in this story before the game starts, but you're entering the story as everything's kind of falling apart at the seams. So, I'm just like looking at the Steam page here to kind of rejig my memory, and like every time you go outside, like there's this great soundscape. There's like rain, thunder, lightning. I found the sounds to be very like loud and overwhelming at times, which I think is part of it. Like it's very like this it's very sensory overload is what I got from it. Like I played on my Steam Deck. I did not play with headphones, but at times like the sounds were like themselves not scary, but the like intensity of the sounds were kind of horrifying. And when I talk about playing on Steam Deck too, so like I said, I played it on Steam Deck. The only issue I ran into, because otherwise it ran beautifully on Steam Deck, there's like collectibles in the game, and they're like backstory for all the characters. They're called CPU logs. And so when I was trying to scroll through the CPU logs to read them, sometimes I had issues getting the scrolling to activate, actually. So again, it's not that hard to get around. Like you can like use the touchscreen or you can use the trackpads. You just kind of gotta like move the D-pad around a bit until you like get it to work. If there's like some kind of like indicator telling you that you're on the scrolling wheel, it doesn't tell you that. Like you can't see it. So eventually you'll just figure, oh, I'm on the scroll wheel now, and then you can use the touchscreen or you can use the trackpad or you can use the D-pad, and then you can scroll through. But aside from that, like I'm going on about it like it's a major issue. It was seriously super minor. It took me like 3 seconds each time to just like get it to like connect itself basically, and then you were scrolling through. And again, the collectibles, they're collectibles. I recommend you find them all if you can, but I did have to look up a guide for the last two, so I played twice. I think there's 13 of these CPU logs, and I found 11 on my initial playthrough, and so I missed 2. And the 2 that I missed, I think, were later in the game, but I did find a guide. I think it was on Steam's forums where I found for the game, where I found the guide to finding the rest of them, just because I didn't want to miss them going through. I only have so much time in the game, so as much as I'd like to play this game a third time, I'm not sure I'm going to have the chance to play it a third time. Plus, I wanted to talk about this on the show. I wanted to say that I got all the achievements on the show, which I did. One of the achievements is like super early on too, and it's like very easy to miss, but like very easy to get to if you find it. So achievements aren't everything, but I do like that the game has them. So as I was saying before too, the game has really good queer representation. The trans femme character has this great storyline that's kind of fucked up despite being completely horrible, and how she comes to terms with her identity. It's something I think most trans people would have done in her situation. Again, I'm going to come back to this in the spoilery section, but I do want to kind of tease it to get you to come back and listen, at least after you've played the game. And I do recommend, if you haven't played it, don't go listen to the spoilers. It would be really cool for you to discover most of this by yourself. So, the first time I played through the game, I did find some of the mysteries confusing a little bit. I had theories, and then when I played through a second time, I sort of grasped everything a little bit better. I still have a lot of theories, but I understood more of the game the second time I played through it. And again, I'm really trying not to describe too much of the game itself because I really don't want to spoil it. I really think like if you're listening to this podcast and you want more recommendations for queer games, this should be at the top of your list. Especially, I know a lot of people who listen to this podcast are actually from Toronto. It's a Toronto set game. Now, inside the game itself, I only noticed one mention of Toronto, which was actually one of the CPU logs I found in my second playthrough. So I didn't actually know it was for sure set in Toronto, because it's not like when you see outside, there's not like a shot of the CN Tower or anything like that. But and in this futuristic Toronto, I don't even know if the CN Tower survived, to be honest. It's pretty bleak. But the Steam profile does mention, the Steam page does mention that it's set in Toronto, which I think is really cool. I do recommend that you play it though, because it's like, despite being full of mysteries and weirdness, and also if you can stomach the horror of it all, of course, if you're not into horror games, it is kind of scary. So I recommend not playing it if you're scared. Maybe watch a playthrough or go read about it or listen to this podcast, obviously. But if you can get past the horror elements or you're into that and you're into horror games, this is like top of the list recommendation. The aesthetic is super cohesive. It's super pretty to look at. It wears its queerness on its sleeve, though, is ultimately what I'm trying to say here. Is like the second you start playing this game, you're gonna be like, yeah, this was made by queer developers. Yep, this was made with queer characters in mind. Like, I think this game's strongest selling point, and it has a lot of strong selling points, is how queerness is contained in every element of the narrative and visuals in some way. The game is ultimately about a lost soul, navigating a confined space that was once supposed to be a safe space, as you face the horrors of your past, horrors you come to find that you can't really escape, or can you? The game does raise that question. It's almost like this haunted house represents Hayes' mind, and you're trying desperately to escape their own mind. Like, you're playing as Hayes, obviously. So, and like I said, this game is horrifying, and if it's too much for you, the developer's second most recent game, Raptor Boyfriend, has all the good queerness you'd want in a much more approachable and friendly package. And just going back to Psychroma quickly before we move on to Raptor Boyfriend, like I said, it's scary, it's full of blood, it's like really creepy just kind of walking around the halls, like every time you go to a new floor. So one thing I didn't mention about the game is like you're in a house, but it's more of like an apartment building with multiple floors. So as you're unlocking each floor and like exploring each floor, like there's just creepy stuff going on too. Like there's one room where you enter and like there's just a person there, and then you like go into the actual room and the person disappears. And it's really creepy too because the person is like, the path forward is blocked by like a pile of garbage. So you can't actually move forward in the room. So you have to go around. But on the other side of the pile of garbage, you can see a person standing there. And when I was playing the game, I didn't really think of it as like quote unquote a haunted house, which I know is what they describe it as. But to me, the game really, despite having like these haunted elements in it, the hauntedness to me came through in like the memories in the house and the memories that you play through just being like really, really creepy. Because to me, at the end of the day, like the game was about like surviving the horrors of the world, like surviving the horrors of like medical experimentation, which is another part of the game, and just like dealing with like the volatility of living with people that you like think you know but you don't really know. And at the end of the day, like the common thread you have between you is like that you're lost and you're queer. Not that those two always go hand in hand, but often they do. So the game does a very good job of exploring like what it means to have found family and what it means to like for that intersectionality to like crisscross and also clash at times. And speaking of medical experimentation, there's one character in particular who's like the villain of the piece. I won't spoil too much, but yeah, she's really horrible. She's like really horrible. When Ekami was streaming it the other day, she messaged me and she's like, this person is awful. Let me see if I can actually find exactly what Ekami said here. Okay, so I found it, and it's actually not something, Ekami said, but it's something I said in response to her. She said, I just played through said character's memory card for the first time. Not done, but might be halfway. And I replied, she's a sick fuck. And Ekami did reply, also, yes, she really is. So, I mean, that was one of my first thoughts in the game. Ekami also did notice, too, that there is one particular color scheme that does seem reminiscent of the lesbian flag. And I'm actually also seeing it here on Steam. There's like one screenshot of like in the trailer of this like moment with the lesbian flag. Because there's like all these moments, too, where you're like wandering through colors or just like looking through colors. Even the rooms are also kind of color coded in their own way. So like I said, color is a very important part of the game. And honestly, without getting too essay about it, like this is something you could like, if I was a high school teacher and I was having people not just like students not read not just like books, but not just watch movies and write essays about them, I would have them play Psychroma. Because it's just so dark and grim and full of imagery and full of stuff to talk about that you could write an endless number of essays on this. And I know everyone's sitting here thinking like, Zoe, why would anyone want to write an essay in general? But anyway, this is something I could talk about endlessly, and I might even still come back to this and talk about this again, or even do a blog post on the website about this at some point in the future. Like I said, I think my brain's going to be kind of processing this and percolating this through this game for years, and I honestly think like those are the best pieces of media you can consume, that you can enjoy, that you can experience. So I do recommend, like I said, Psychroma is like, I think it only took me 3 hours to play through it once, another 3 hours in the second playthrough. There was one thing I had an issue with, and I'm not sure, this might just be a me thing because I've noticed in the last couple of years I've been getting less and less sleep, so my memory is kind of worse. And so something I did notice in the game, and again, this might also be intentional by the devs, I don't know. I don't know if I'm gaslighting myself into thinking this, but like I said, the game is about memory. The game would give you an instruction, but then the game would like not give you that instruction again. It was really hard to get back to a point where you could find out what that instruction was. It'd be like, go find this person or go to this room or go do this thing. And then by the end of the discussion, like they would tell you at the beginning of the discussion, and then there'd be other things in that discussion. And then you'd be like, okay, the discussion's over. What was I supposed to do again? Again, I don't know if that's a me problem or if that's the game if the game is intentionally doing that. Either way, I think it really, for me personally, added to my experience for the game, because even though when you go to the menu, there's like kind of like an objective marker. It'll say like, oh, you go find Agatha. Okay. But at the same time, like there might have been a clue as to where to find her or what you're supposed to do specifically next to find her. That's like the overarching objective. It's almost like in Breath of the Wild, kill Calamity Ganon. Like, okay, great, I can go kill Calamity Ganon, but like, how do I do that? So, I wouldn't say that's a negative part of it. It felt like part of the experience for me. So maybe other people have better memories than me and don't experience that. But I'd love to hear from anyone who played the game who maybe did or did not have that experience. One thing I do want to talk about, though, that's really cool. It's kind of my last note on this before we move on to Raptor Boyfriend. But this game was also localized into 16 languages by Queer Them All, which is a group of volunteers who localized last year 2 queer indie games for free. So their mission statement is, our goals are to promote diversity in video games by making queer indie games available in many languages, and to offer linguists a chance to be featured on a meaningful project. We hope that this event will help them grow their career and take part into paid projects. As game lock, which I assume means game localization, is a passion but also mostly a job. So the 16 languages that Psychroma was localized into is Catalan, Croatian, Dutch, French, German, Hungarian, Italian, Korean, Brazilian Portuguese, European Portuguese, Russian, European Spanish, Latin American Spanish, Thai, and Turkish. So this is a really cool volunteer project, and they picked a couple of games to localize, and then they gave their volunteer translators a choice between Psychroma and another game, Confluence, and of Sense of Soul Soliloquy. I hope I'm saying that right. I'm not too sure. So my final recommendation for Psychroma is that this game is not for the faint of heart. It's full of body horror and violence and human experimentation and all kinds of other really scary things like blood. But if that's your jam, and I don't say blood like blood's scary, but like there's a lot of like gory elements to it. So, but if you like Blade Runner or Ghost in the Shell or even Cyberpunk 2077, like I think this game is right up your alley. It's got that right mix of like body horror, queeriness, body horror, but also just like really well thought out themes and ideas that there's like layers and layers there for you to find. And it's the kind of game that makes you want to replay it. Like you finish the game and you go, what the fuck did I just play? So if stuff like that is your jam, this game is for you. Aside from the queerness, this game Raptor Boyfriend, a high school romance, it's so different from Psychroma in so many ways, yet it's still very, very similar. Like you can tell it's still made by the same devs, absolutely. And you can still tell like it wears its queer heart on its sleeve. But aside from that, like visually, thematically, like it's such a very different story. But again, in a lot of ways, like again, I could write a whole like essay on this and how it's similar actually, how they're very similar despite like, if you were to look at these two games side by side, just like the titles and like the key art, you might go, these are 2 different developers, but it's the same developer. And anyway, so Raptor Boyfriend, a high school romance is a very different game. It came out in 2021. It's a visual novel. And like I said, very different visually and conceptually from Psychroma. But the Steam description is as follows. Raptor Boyfriend, a high school romance, is a dating sim about a teen girl who moves to a small secret community of cryptids. Romance a magical fairy, a sensitive Sasquatch, and a bold velociraptor. A satirical 90s teen drama about trying to find love in your last year of high school. So this game is available on PC, Nintendo Switch, PS4, and Xbox Series. It's also available on PS5 at least through backwards compatibility, if not natively. But this game is seriously charming. Like Psychroma, I would not describe as charming. Like I loved it, and I would go to bat for this game for Psychroma any day of the week. But like Raptor Boyfriend is like, I would describe it as charming. I would describe it as cute. I would describe it so differently. Like I said, you can tell it comes from the same developers, Rocket Adrift, because it wears its queerness on its sleeve, but it's also far less bleak. It's a happier game, and like there's bleak moments to it. It's kind of sad at times, as any coming of age story is. But the game takes place over the course of your senior year in high school, and you've just returned to a small town full of cryptids where you, Stella, a young woman, used to spend your summers. So, like I said, you can romance a Bigfoot, Taylor, who was your childhood friend that you fell out of touch with. You can romance a fae called Day, which gives you the option to play a sapphic route if you want. Or you can romance Robert, the titular velociraptor. His name is Robert Raptorson, by the way, which is kind of clever and funny. So the gameplay loop is that you play through, I think, about 7 days of the school year, each day being from a different part of the year. So like, let's say the first day of the game is your first day of high school. The second day is like Halloween. The third day is like the days before Christmas break. So it just kind of like, it takes you through the course of the high school year. But you only really play like a week's worth of content. And I say that like, I say content, I don't mean it that way. It's just like, there's like, you play through 7 days of the game. So you're not playing like through like all 300 days of the school year, for example. But in each day, you get a chance to focus on one of the romance paths. So basically each day, like you go to school, you interact with your friends, there's usually some kind of conflict. And then you go home at the end of the school day and you're like kind of chilling after work. Your dad, who you live with, who moved you to this small town, is usually not, I don't think he's ever actually present, but he always leaves you a note in the fridge. And then there's usually some messages on your answering machine because it's set in the 90s. So like it's on a house answering machine. There's no cell phones. For anyone who wants to know, who didn't grow up when there was still like, it was still common to just have a house phone. Like you can maybe see what it was like at the time. But anyway, so you listen to the voicemail. You hear usually a call from Taylor, a call from Faye, and a call from Robert. And then they all ask you to call them back, obviously. Like they've all got a problem they want to talk through with you, or they want you to help solve, or they want to get your opinion on something. And then you go up to your bedroom, and that's where you can kind of like look at your collectibles. There's usually like a moment by the window where you think, and then you go to your bed and you choose one of your friends to call. So when the game doesn't tell you that. You figure that out after the first day. You're like, okay, I'm going to call one friend. And I think maybe the game does tell you like, oh, I have time to call one friend. But then the next day it doesn't say that again. So you just have to assume that like you get to call one friend per day. And that's where you're kind of picking which path you're going to romance who to depend on, to determine what ending you get. And so what I like about this choosing your path option is like you kind of get to choose what sexuality you want to follow down your path as. So you can be as straight or gay, as bisexual as you like. I kind of focused on Robert because I found him the most interesting. But there were other days where I called Faye. There were other days where I called Taylor. So it really did feel like I was playing the game as a bisexual. Each romanceable character too has a friend that you can engage with in various ways to help bond with the romanceable character. So my favorite, like, quote unquote side character was the poltergeist, whose name escapes me. I've been trying to rack my brain for what her name was. I can't remember. But the poltergeist, who's Day's friend, maybe ex-lover, I'm not sure. Again, because I chose Robert, I feel like a lot of paths in terms of dialogue weren't open to me as much. I only played through this game once. I do plan to play through it again. Unfortunately, I did not have time to play through it a second time before this podcast. But I was very curious to know more about the poltergeist story, because at one point they hint that like maybe she only died like a year ago and maybe she's Faye's ex-lover, but she seems to really hate you, the main character. And I'm sensing quite a bit of jealousy. So if I was going to go through and play again, I would want to romance Faye so I could also find out more about the poltergeist as well. Plus there's a storyline with like a cursed book in the library, which is also interesting, and I feel like that's part of the same path. Maybe they're even related. So, but because I chose Robert, I was really only able to bond with his friend, who's like his childhood friend, who's like constantly worried about him, and she's always mad that he's like putting himself in danger and not communicating his feelings with her. So at first you think she also might be jealous of you, but it turns out she's just upset in general at Robert. So anyway, I won't spoil too much again. But I do recommend playing the game. Choose your own path, and you'll get to, again, Taylor also has a friend too he's in a band with, and they're having some conflict as well. So, like, there's more than just romancing a character. There's also, like, the character you're romancing. You meet their best friend, for example. So, it's just like real life. Like, when you meet someone new and you're into someone, like, you're always finding out what their interests are like. You're bonding with them. You're meeting their friends. It's really great, too, because I didn't get to experience high school as a girl. And we can sit here and argue all day about whether or not I was quote unquote a girl in high school despite not having transitioned. But generally speaking, like, my experience was like I was presenting masculine in high school, so I didn't experience high school as a woman, as a girl. So playing through this game gave me that experience. And I know, again, that experience is unique to me. But I thought that was super special. And I want to play it again too, because it also lets me experience kind of bisexuality, because I've been with my partner for 10 years now. And even though we're kind of like playing around with polyamory and what that's like, I haven't really been with men before. So it was kind of like a nice way to dip my toe in by playing this game. And it has opened the door for me to possibly play either more visual novels or more dating sims, or both. So, but first I do want to go back through this game a couple more times and try each path and get every ending. The only thing I found kind of difficult about this game was that I had trouble getting all the collectibles, and maybe I just wasn't choosing the right dialogue options. But whenever I got a collectible, I was like, oh, this is cool, because usually it's like, oh, you reached a point in the relationship, or like you reached a moment in a friendship where you revealed something about someone, so you get like a collectible to go look at as like kind of a memento of the relationship you've just kind of advanced. And I don't mean just romantic relationship too, but when you, for example, if you get any further with the poltergeist and you get to know them better, you would unlock other collectibles related to that character's path. But I only think I found 2 out of, like, I want to say 21 collectibles. So I don't know what I was doing wrong, but I definitely felt by the end of the game, I was like, I only have 2 of these things, or maybe 3 out of like a lot. So I want to play again to see if I can, like, and again, the game too, also, like, if you're playing through the game and you really want to like figure everything out or like do a redo, you can go into the menu and like scroll back through and see what all the dialogue was in case you accidentally skipped through something, or you forgot something and you want to like check a detail, or you just want to read it again. But also it lets you like undo. So like you can go back. I never really tested to see how far you could go back, because I only ever went back as far as I needed to, which was a couple lines to go back to a choice. So it's kind of like Life is Strange in that way, is that you can kind of undo things even though it's not really part of the narrative. And I played on Steam Deck, and the only issue I really had on Steam Deck was the same thing, was scrolling through that chat history, the conversation history. I had the same issues as I did with Psychroma with scrolling. So like I would have to like kind of like guide the cursor on the Steam Deck to the scroll wheel and hope it figured out that I wanted to scroll. Again, super minor issue, because it only takes 3 seconds to kind of like rejig it so it works. But again, the only real issue I noticed, and it's funny too, because I'm pretty sure Raptor Boyfriend, I'm just checking here on the Steam page, I don't think it's actually verified. It's just playable. And the reason it gives for only being playable is it says some functionality is not accessible when using the default controller configuration, requiring use of the touchscreen or virtual keyboard, or a community configuration. So again, the only time I had the issue again was in the menu when I was trying to read through the conversation history. So maybe that is enough to make a game not playable, but they also say that some in-game text is small and may be difficult to read. I don't wear glasses, and I don't really have trouble seeing most text on any screen unless it's really, really, really small, but I didn't find that this text was too small to read, but I suppose that some people did find it that way, so maybe that's why it's only considered playable. But I would consider, if you've got a Steam Deck, you could definitely try it there. And if the game is too small, maybe hook it up to like another screen, which is bigger, and then at least the text issue has been figured out. But if you want to just play in handheld mode, you're mostly like clicking through dialogue options, so like it's not like super gameplay heavy, and performance is fine on the Steam Deck. So it also does say this game's default graphics configuration performs well on Steam Deck, and I would argue that for the most part it does, aside again from the scrolling. So, and looking at the Steam page too, it does look like there's also a demo if you want to try the demo out. So if you're not sure, give the demo a try. I think you'll enjoy it. I think the people that might enjoy Psychroma more, if you're not, I consider myself interested in a variety of different genres and things. Like I have a very, and I don't want to say this in a negative way, but I have a very open mind. And I'm not saying that anyone who doesn't want to play Psychroma doesn't have an open mind, but like I like a variety of things. So But if you're like focused on, if you're like more interested in things that are charming or more interested in things that are like scary, like I don't know if there's a lot of like crossover in terms of which one you'll enjoy over the other. Like enjoying both rather is what I mean to say. So like if you're into visual novels or dating sims, Psychroma might not be for you. But if you're into horror things, Raptor Boyfriend might not be for you. Personally, I liked both. And if you're into queer games, like if you're looking for just queer vibes, I think both games are amazing for that. If you can stomach the horror of Psychroma, or you're into, like, again, trying different romance paths. But the game is adorable. The game is really, really cute. At first I was like, I'm not sure how I feel about dating like a literal velociraptor, but it's so charming and funny. But I did write down some other notes here. It's full of relatable teenager high school things like bands. Like when I was in high school, like everyone I knew was either in a band or like following a high school band. Maybe that, again, that might have been an experience unique to me, but I had friends in bands. I went to all their shows. So there's definitely that element of it. Another universal one, which is like the feeling of loneliness when you're in high school and trying to fit in, like trying to find your people. And like the group of friends in this game is definitely like a group of people that don't fit in anywhere else. So their common thread is that they don't fit in. And it does seem to be a source of conflict for them a lot too, is that they don't really get along very well. But again, I think that's kind of a universal high school experience. At least it was for me, especially like, even if you didn't know you were queer in high school, I look back on it, and I had Graham on the show last week, and we were both queer in high school, and I had Ekami on the show before, and I went to high school with Ekami as well. And when we were in high school, none of us knew that we were queer, but we were all friends. So it's kind of weird how you find your people while also looking to find. Anyway, there's also the element of like forcing yourself to try things or do things or meet people or into romances because you feel like the end of high school is like a deadline for those experiences. Like once you turn 18 and once you graduate, like your life's kind of over. And the game really does hammer home that vibe. And I definitely remember it too. I remember watching lots of movies and watching lots of shows growing up where like high school is the be all and end all. Like this is where you're going to lose your virginity. This is where you're going to meet the person you're with the rest of your life. Even though this is like all not necessary and all not true. The game definitely like kind of hammers that home, that feeling. So like, if you missed out on like a proper high school experience or a queer high school experience, this game is for you. It's really fun to kind of play through it as like a what if scenario, or even if you had a queer high school experience, which is awesome, by the way, this game is still very representative of that in a way too. So, and of course, also the other element too that feels very relatable is like going to house parties and like being like, well, we have to party. That's what you do in high school. If we don't party now, we're going to miss out on the best years of our lives. And also getting invited to parties and being included. Like it's a big deal, especially when you're in high school. Like those things feel like they're the most important things. And this game like definitely underscores that quite well. It is set in the 90s, like I mentioned before. So there are a lot of fun 90s pop culture references. That teal and purple 90s logo background design, which is apparently called Jazz. You know, the one that was like on all the cups and all the textbooks and like on the shirts in the textbooks. I'm sure you remember it. If you don't, look up Jazz and you'll go, oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. Just type into Google like Jazz 90s design. I didn't even know it had a name until I looked it up on Google yesterday. There's also a reference. I can't remember where in the game, but there is a reference to the infamous Basic Instinct leg crossing scene. You know the one. And if you don't know the one, look it up. I'm sure you've heard it referenced in pop culture before because I've never even seen Basic Instinct, but I know the scene because it's been referenced so much. And I mentioned earlier a cursed book in the library, and that felt reminiscent of a cursed videotape like from The Ring. There's also a TV show they parody. So when she's in the kitchen and she's like kind of like eating after school, and there's the note on the fridge, and there's the voicemails. There's also a TV that you watch. Sometimes it plays the news, but other times it plays a show that's parodying Friends from the 90s. And I think Friends aired for a long time, like 10 seasons or something ridiculous like that. But so like I said, I wanted to learn more about the cursed book, but I couldn't seem to find the path for that because I was focused so heavily on Robert. I'm not sure if there's a way to kind of open up all the paths while you're also kind of like romancing one character, or if you like try to like equally romance everyone. I'm not sure what happens there. Obviously the game does have, I think, 7 days. So let's say you do 2 days, 2 days, and 2 days for each character. Then on the last day, obviously whoever you pick would probably outweigh the others. So you'd have to pick like a third one of the characters to be the one that you like get the ending for. But I do wonder you keep everything equal as the story goes on, that you can unlock other paths and branches. I'm not sure. But yeah, my final recommendation for Raptor Boyfriend is definitely, if you like coming of age stories, if you like dating sims, if you like visual novels, if you like games with multiple paths, or if you like queer games, this game is for you. It's very charming. In a lot of ways, like I said, it's the antithesis to Psychroma, but like I said, like, the game wears its queerness on its sleeve. So like, Day the Fae is like pretty openly queer. Again, the words are never really uttered in the game, and no one really questions Stella's sexuality when she makes moves one way or the other. No one's like, oh, you're... And again, I didn't choose to focus on romancing Day, so it's possible that there might be some kind of sapphic commentary when you do that, or comments from other characters. I'm not sure. But for the most part, like, the game is already weird enough. Like, you're dating cryptids, which is also not really questioned in the game either, which is super cool. In this world, it seems like cryptids, like, are known about, but they're not really, like, something people talk about, because they're, like, kind of hidden away in this small town, but it doesn't mean they're, like, hiding. And the game also has this really cool commentary about, like, building a highway through the town. And it is set, again, it's set in Northern Ontario. So they are talking about, like, this Ontario highway that they're planning to build through. And some people in the town are like, oh, you know, this is going to threaten our way of life. Other people are like, yay, we're going to have access to the wider world finally. But no one's super, super worried about, like, oh yeah, they're going to find out that there's a whole community of Bigfoots and a whole community of fairies and a whole community of velociraptors living out here. Like, for example, like, the poltergeist in the game is, like, kind of a normal thing. Like, when people are mad at her, they're mad at her at kind of, like, being more of a nuisance in terms of, like, eavesdropping, and not so much like being a poltergeist. The game is, like, weird, but it doesn't really, like, because everything, all the weirdness is so normal, so is the queerness. So it kind of normalizes it, which is, like, honestly how it should be. So if you want a game too that has queerness in it, but doesn't, like, slam it in your face, for lack of a better word, like slap you in the face with it, this is a game for you. So my recommendation is that you should definitely go play Raptor Boyfriend, a high school romance. So now I just want to quickly dive into some spoilers for Psychroma. So again, most of this is only really going to make sense if you've played the game. So please come back after playing it, or if you've already played it, stick around. But I do want to talk about the trans femme character, Salem. So Salem is Agatha's partner, and they run the house together, or rather, they did run the house together, but Salem has since passed away. The flashbacks to their lives seem to be much earlier in their lives, like maybe 20, 30, even 40 years before that. And I say quote unquote flashbacks, but it's really the memories you're living through Agatha's perspective. But you do find out through flashbacks that Salem used to be a man, and before her egg cracked, she would dive into the memories of the scientist researcher person, so this Dr. Holloway person, who is, like I said, a sick fuck. And she used to run the laboratory hidden in the house. So that's why her memories are kind of available to you. And Dr. Holloway would experiment on and torture people. And so Salem would walk through her memories, and despite those memories being full of torture and murder, manipulation, abuse, like, this person is like the worst of the worst. She's horrible. But Salem obviously had access to a woman's memories, and she couldn't live as a woman otherwise except through this person's memories. So her egg was cracking through experiencing this person's life. So despite this person being terrible, you know, it was like the best Salem could get, so to speak. Like, Salem's only way to experience it was her only way to experience womanhood. And I did write down here that she found comfort in it. And to be honest, I might have done the same. That might be controversial. I don't condone any of Dr. Holloway's actions, and I know there's people in real life who do horrible things to people, and I don't condone them either. But when your egg is solid and sealed, you really do, as a trans person, before it cracks, find femininity wherever you can, even in the most unlikely places. For example, like, I used to obsess over, like, body swapping or gender transformation movies and shows. Even if I didn't like what the story was about or relate to it in any way, it was all about trying my most desperate attempt to put myself in the shoes of a man who gets to live as a woman, or someone living as a woman, because I couldn't do that in real life. And so, like, I understand Salem living through this horrible person's mind and trying to just, like, drink in and consume every little bit of femininity that she could before she could transition, before she even realized why she was interested in it, right? Because it does feel like in our minds, we kind of make transitioning like kind of taboo. So other taboo things to get this taboo thing in the first place doesn't seem that wild in the moment, of course. But looking back, you're like, wow, I can't believe I was so obsessed with body swapping stuff that like there was one time, oh my gosh, Ekami was placing an order for some like merchandise and movies and books from Right Stuff, which is an anime website, and she asked if I wanted anything because like the free shipping threshold, at least at the time, was super high. I think it was like, I want to say it was like anywhere from 150 to 250 Canadian, or maybe even US. So she's like, do you want anything? And I was like, okay, well, there's this one show, and I haven't gone back to it, so I don't know how well it's aged, but there was one show I wanted on Blu-ray called Camphor. It's body swapping. Or not body swapping, I guess it's gender transformation, because the character becomes like a magical girl. He transitions from male to female for the purposes of like, I think fighting crime. It's been so long since I watched it, but when I asked Amy to order it, I was like, I hope she doesn't figure out what this show is about. She didn't even question it. Even if she knew, I think we talked about it afterwards, and Akemi said, oh, I had no idea what it was about. I didn't know why you wanted it. She was probably just glad at the time to get something that gets her over the free shipping threshold. But I do remember at the time being like, I hope she doesn't look too closely at this. But like, again, it was like that desperate moment of like, I couldn't find all the episodes online. And also, I really do like to support creators, even when it's corporations. I do like to not pirate things when I can. If things are accessible, I like to get them in the best, and I also like to own things in the best quality too. So having something on Blu-ray is quite nice. Plus, I had it accessible to me at any time, with or without internet. I had this access to my femininity through this show. So anyway, I'm getting kind of long in the tooth here, but I ordered this show and I inhaled it at the time. Like I drank it right in. I consumed it entirely. I think I finished it all in one sitting, and it was just so like I get just trying to find these moments of femininity, these moments of feminine experience, these moments of womanhood, and what it's like to be a woman through whatever you can. It's almost like a drug. It's almost like an addiction before you transition. So, and there's this moment too in the game where Salem was quite ashamed of what she's been doing, and Agatha's big concern with this scenario is like, why are you interested in like living as a murderer? But for Salem, it wasn't living as a murderer or as someone who tortures or as someone who abuses. It was living as a woman, and because that was the easiest way to experience that, So Agatha's just like relieved to learn that, oh, you want to be a woman, you don't want to be a murderer. Thank gosh. Oh my god. So there were just elements of that storyline that were just very relatable to me. I also have some theories about the ending. And again, I'm still processing this game. I have a lot of theories, and the theories I had on my first playthrough are completely different from the theories I have on my second playthrough. But my theory is that what's happening in the house is a physical manifestation of what is happening to Hayes while their memories are being deleted in real time. So all the weird stuff that's happening in this house and all these memories and all this stuff that's kind of bubbling to the surface, I do wonder if it's not some kind of like representation of, and the house falling apart too, is not some like physical representation of Hayes' memories slowly being deleted. Like almost like you're playing through the memories as they're being deleted. Or maybe like the deleting didn't happen right away and there's still bits and pieces of the memories still in Hayes' brain as they are slowly being wiped away. And maybe even possibly that you can't truly delete your memories. You can't truly wipe your memories, that there's always going to be something there because you are a product of your memories and experiences. So it's possible that Hayes can't forget Domino because Domino, being Hayes' friend who keeps following them around the house, who nobody else can seem to see, Domino seems to be a physical representation of Hayes' memories. And so Domino, of a representation of Hayes' memories, does not want to be forgotten, almost like Hayes' memories saying like, you can't forget me, please don't forget me, don't wipe your experiences away. Experiences with Domino made Hayes who they are today. So you can't just like get rid of that. No matter what, it's always going to come back to haunt you. And maybe it's just a metaphor for like your past always comes back to haunt you, But like I said, maybe it's really just about like your memories fighting back and trying not to be deleted. I'm like, maybe the main message of the game is that your memories can't be deleted no matter how hard you try. You can't erase your experiences. You can't erase your memories. They're here. They're a part of you. They're inside you. And they will always try to fight back. They will always bubble back to the surface the way Domino keeps appearing even though Hayes is deleting or has already deleted their memories. But like I said, this is the kind of game you need to play multiple times. And when I play it a third time, I might experience and come to different conclusions than I did the first 2 times. So like, who knows, right? As for Raptor Boyfriend, I don't really have too many spoilery things to talk about here specifically, but it's just that I really enjoyed both games, and at some point I do plan to go and play their first game, which is called Order a Pizza. Let me just pull it up here. It's like a visual novel where you play as a divorced dad trying to order the perfect pizza. This game was Rocket Adrift's submission for the 2019 Nano Reno Game Jam. So it was made in the month of March. As a divorced dad, you learn through exploring the items in your apartment and navigate difficult conversations in order to find the perfect pizza. Abby, your daughter, is meeting Margot, your girlfriend, for the first time. It's an awkward situation that only the right pizza toppings can solve, which I think is kind of funny in a good way. So explore their backstories and make a tough decision, and everything will be fine. No weird shit will happen, we swear. So it's a name your own price type game. So they're accepting donations of any amount to play the game. And I think it's only available on itch. You can't get it on Steam. I don't think it's available on any consoles as far as I know. Speaking of all their games, though, I do hope that Psychroma comes, like I said before, I do hope Psychroma comes to consoles. More people need to play it. It's gorgeous. It's full of interesting content and commentary and stories and characters. And it's just a very good representation of queerness. Even if you're not queer, I recommend this game. Although, again, I think anyone who's really, really transphobic or queerphobic is going to get through half the game and go, oh, it's queer. Ew, I don't like this. But you know what? Whatever. Screw them. This game is really good. I love it. I don't really give games like ratings. I would give it a 10 out of 10 though. Because I thought it was just so... The first time I played it, I would have maybe said like an 8 or a 9. But playing through it again, I'm just like, there's so much here. There's so many layers to kind of peel back in this game, in Psychroma. Same with Raptor Boyfriend. Like, I feel like I've barely scratched the surface doing one playthrough. I would really like to play through all 3, get all 3 endings first, and see if that doesn't help me uncover everything through it. But I would also give Raptor Boyfriend a 10 out of 10, purely because it let me live through my high school experience as a woman again. So, but yeah, I do recommend checking out the games of Rocket Adrift. Really cool queer developer making queer games from the city that I'm from. So that just about wraps up this week's show. Thanks, True Avatars, for joining me for another episode of your Queer Video Game Podcast. If you've made it this far into the episode, I really appreciate you taking the time to support queer-made content, which is a big deal. If you want to support the show, it would be really great if you could leave a rating, review, or comment on your preferred podcast platform. I welcome you to check out the website, trueavatarspodcast.com, all one word, that's trueavatarspodcast.com. You can also find the show on Facebook and Instagram under True Avatars, Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky, and YouTube under the handle @TrueAvatars, all one word. Importantly, if you or anyone you know is queer and involved with video games in some way, please don't be shy. I would love to hear from more queer voices in video games. Your voice is unique and valid and worth sharing with the world. And if you don't want to be on the show, or you don't know anyone who's interested, but you know about a cool queer video game or a games industry story that's queer related, please let me know. The show's official email is trueavatars.podcast@gmail.com. That's trueavatars.podcast@gmail.com. You can also feel free to reach out via the website, which has a form for that, or the aforementioned social media pages. Things are tough out there, and queer people need to stick together when we can. Bye, True Avatars. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to speaking with you all again next week. Take care and stay safe.